What happened when an undercover CEO traded his suit for an apron and uncovered a betrayal that nearly destroyed his family's beloved bakery? Welcome, wise and passionate listeners, the kind of people who value tradition, heart, and integrity. Your loyalty to true stories of resilience and justice is exactly what makes this community so special. Today's story isn't just about saving a business. It's about rediscovering the soul that built it. Stay with us, because what unfolds will remind you that real leadership isn't about power. It's about protecting what matters most. Let's dive in. The scent of cinnamon and warm brown sugar filled the air as young Elliot Marsh stood on a wooden stool beside his grandmother Ruth in the tiny kitchen of the original Sweet Crumbs bakery. Her hands, dusted with flour and wisdom, moved with practiced grace as she shaped the dough, humming an old hymn passed down from her mother. "It's not just about taste," she whispered, tapping his chest with a floury finger. "It's about what you put in here." That moment stayed with Elliot for decades. Not the recipe itself, but the lesson behind it. Now, years later, Elliot sat in a rental car outside a struggling Sweet Crumbs location, the once proud bakery chain bearing his family's name and reputation. Sales were dropping, customer complaints piling up, and something sacred felt missing. As he adjusted his disguise in the mirror, Elliot knew one thing for certain. To protect the legacy, he had to go back to where it began. Elliot Marsh tugged the frayed edges of his secondhand jacket tighter against the cool morning breeze as he pushed open the door to Sweet Crumbs' Charleston location. A soft chime echoed above him, once a cheerful welcome, now sounding tired and worn. The bakery smelled faintly of cinnamon and baked goods, but there was a hollowness to it, like a memory fading. Elliot scanned the interior, his heart sinking. The old charm, the bright counters, gleaming cases, and bustling warmth he remembered, had given way to cracked floor tiles, smudged glass, and listless employees moving without energy. A couple at a corner table poked half-heartedly at their cinnamon rolls, the thick frosting sliding off in clumps. The bakery, once a place where customers lingered with smiles and powdered sugar kisses, now had the sterile feeling of a business just going through the motions. Keeping his cover, Elliot approached the counter where a teenager with a bored expression barely glanced up. "One cinnamon roll and a black coffee," he said in a low voice, masking his natural authority. As he waited, he observed more. The menu signs were faded, a bulb above the display flickered, and the glass case had fingerprints smudged across it, details his grandmother would never have allowed. His order was arrived, haphazardly placed on a chipped plate. Elliot carried it to a corner booth, seating himself with a slow sigh. The coffee was weak and bitter, but it was the cinnamon roll that twisted in his gut. On the surface, it looked right. Golden brown, generously iced. But the first bite told the truth. The dough lacked the tender chew his grandmother had perfected. The cinnamon was harsh, missing the rich, buttery depth that once set Sweet Crumbs apart. It tasted hollow, factory-made. He forced himself to swallow, biting back the bitter disappointment rising in his chest. Elliot had suspected trouble from the quarterly reports, a 17% drop in customer satisfaction, alarming dips in repeat business, but no spreadsheet could capture the quiet death happening here. This wasn't just about profits. It was about the soul of his family's legacy slipping away, one tasteless pastry at a time. As he sipped the lukewarm coffee, he knew spreadsheets wouldn't save Sweet Crumbs. Neither would boardroom strategies or distant policies. No. To understand what was truly wrong, he had to bury himself deep inside this world, to see the rot from within. Steeling himself, Elliot glanced around once more, memorizing every crack, every smudge, every sad frown of a once loyal customer. If he didn't act now, Sweet Crumbs would soon be just another forgotten brand, and everything his grandmother fought for would be lost. Tomorrow, Cal Mason, dishwasher, nobody, would apply for a job. And Elliot Marsh would disappear. The next morning, Elliot, now answering only to the name Cal Mason, stood behind the stainless steel sinks of Sweet Crumbs, sleeves rolled up, wrists deep in grimy water. The industrial kitchen roared with noise, the clatter of baking trays, the hiss of steamers, the occasional sharp bark of a frustrated manager. Nobody paid him much attention. He was just another faceless drifter looking for work. invisible to the very people he once fought to protect. His hands, once accustomed to boardroom presentations and legal contracts, burned from the sting of cheap detergent. As he scrubbed and stacked, Elliot quietly observed the shortcuts taken, the corners cut. Bakers rushed through recipes without care. Once fresh ingredients were swapped for cheaper, longer-lasting substitutes. The spirit of sweet crumbs had thinned, replaced by assembly line apathy. Between shifts, he sat in the cramped, dim break room, inhaling the stale smell of microwaved meals and overhearing exhausted conversations about missed paychecks and rising rents. One afternoon, Elliot watched a young mother in the bakery front wearily pull apart a dry muffin for her daughter, forcing a smile. His chest tightened painfully. Sweet Crumbs was supposed to be a place where people felt welcome, comforted, even a little bit special, not shortchanged and disappointed. His grandmother had believed food was an act of love. Somewhere along the line, that love had been traded for cost-cutting and corporate indifference. At night, Elliot returned to his cheap motel room, his arms sore, his spirit heavy. He scribbled notes by hand, no digital traces, recording every violation he witnessed. Each broken piece of this bakery reflected a larger truth. Sweet Crumbs was crumbling from the inside out. It wasn't just bad management, it was betrayal of everything the company once stood for. Yet in the kitchen's chaos, Elliot also spotted tiny sparks of what used to be. A young cashier helping a frazzled father find a chocolate croissant for his child. An older baker still dusting pies with an extra sprinkle of sugar out of habit. The bones were still there. The heart could still beat. But Elliot knew saving Sweet Crumbs would take more than just fixing recipes. It would take uncovering the rot that had infected its soul, and rooting it out before it consumed everything. Elliot's chance came on a quiet Tuesday evening when the last of the customers had trickled out and only the hum of the kitchen remained. He moved methodically, scrubbing trays near the swinging door that separated the bakery from the back office. That's when he heard it. Low voices, urgent and reckless. Pressing himself behind a rack of cooling pans, he strained to listen. "It's done," Travis Kane muttered, his voice sharp with excitement. Derek's got the full files now. Recipes, expansion plans, all of it. Elliot's pulse hammered in his ears. Derek Vaughn, his own chief operations officer, was the inside man. The betrayal was deeper than he had feared. "Maple Grove's rolling out the new product next month," Will Harper added, a grin in his voice. "They're calling it Hearth Gold. Sounds just like our branding. No one's going to notice." Travis snorted. "They'll notice when Sweet Crumbs goes under and Maple Grove buys up the scraps for pennies." The callousness in his voice turned Elliot's stomach. This wasn't just theft. It was a deliberate plan to dismantle everything Sweet Crumbs had built, brick by brick. "But what about the new hires?" Will asked, his voice dropping slightly. "That dishwasher, Cal. He seems nosy." Elliot froze. "Relax," Travis said. "He's nobody, just another drifter. Keep an eye on him, though. No mistakes now. We're too close." Elliot forced himself to keep moving, heart pounding. He couldn't risk being discovered, not yet. He finished his work and slipped out into the night, the cool air doing little to ease the burning in his chest. The betrayal wasn't some impersonal corporate maneuver. It was personal. Derek Vaughn had once stood beside him at shareholder meetings, toasted his grandmother's legacy at company anniversaries. Elliot had trusted him with everything, including the keys to the family recipe vault. And now, for money and power, Derek was willing to salt the earth that Ruth Marsh had so lovingly cultivated. Standing under the broken neon glow of the Sweet Crumbs sign, Elliot made a silent vow. He would not let his grandmother's legacy end like this, hollowed out by greed, her memory trampled by opportunists. They thought he was just another invisible man in an apron. They thought wrong. The real fight was just beginning. Over the next several days, Elliot worked with quiet determination, masking the growing storm inside him with the weary shuffle of a dishwasher. Each late-night shift became an opportunity to gather more evidence. Armed with a tiny recording device tucked inside his jacket, he moved unseen through the bakery's operations. It didn't take long to confirm the worst shortcuts were everywhere. Cheap margarine replaced butter, prepackaged mixes substituted for the house-made dough, and deliveries of inferior ingredients were signed off without a second glance. But it wasn't just the quality of the food that had been compromised, it was the very soul of Sweet Crumbs. In hushed conversations after hours, Travis and Will outlined the full extent of the betrayal. Elliot pieced together the ugly picture. Derek Vaughn had been leaking confidential information for months, including upcoming store locations and supply chain contracts. Maple Grove Bakery, once a distant competitor, now had a strategic playbook to dismantle Sweet Crumbs from the inside out. Even worse, Derek was leveraging the internal sabotage to drive down Sweet Crumbs' stock value, setting up a hostile buyout where Maple Grove could swoop in and snatch the company for a fraction of its worth. It was cold, calculated treason. Elliot's chest burned with a mixture of anger and grief. This wasn't just about cinnamon rolls and coffee. It was about the dreams his grandmother had baked into every loaf, every pie. Ruth Marsh had built Sweet Crumbs not for profit, but for people. A sanctuary where weary souls could find comfort, even for a moment. To see it treated as a disposable commodity, a bargaining chip for corporate gain, was almost more than he could bear. Still, Elliot knew rage alone wouldn't save Sweet Crumbs. He needed undeniable proof, something so ironclad even Maple Grove's army of lawyers couldn't wiggle free. Late one evening, after finishing a grueling shift, Elliot slipped into the manager's office under the pretense of cleaning. Using a portable device Diana Chin, his trusted head of security, had given him, he quickly cloned the hard drives of Travis and Will's work computers, financial spreadsheets, email chains, supplier agreements, all of it meticulously copied and screwed. As he walked home that night under a sky heavy with stars, Elliot felt the weight of responsibility settle even deeper on his shoulders. Sweet Crumbs wasn't just a company. It was a living testament to family, to resilience, to hope. He wouldn't allow it to die, not by sabotage and certainly not by betrayal. But he also knew the deeper he dug, the closer he was to being discovered, and the danger was only growing. Elliot had spent so long focused on gathering evidence that he nearly overlooked the quiet struggle unfolding right beside him. Sarah Bennett, the young server who had shown him small kindnesses since his first day, moved differently from the others. She wasn't careless like Travis or arrogant like Will. She worked hard, but there was a fear in her eyes, a heaviness that didn't match someone simply punching a clock. One afternoon, while inventorying paper goods in the stockroom, Elliot seized a chance. "If you could save something you loved," he asked casually, "would you do it, even if it scared you?" Sarah froze, a carton of napkins slipping slightly from her hands. For a long moment she said nothing. Then, in a whisper, she confessed, "I know they're cutting corners. I know about the recipe too. Not everything, but enough to make me sick inside." Tears welled in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. "I needed the money," she continued, voice raw. "My brother's surgery, my mom's treatments. I didn't know what else to do. Travis said it was just a small thing, that no one would get hurt." Elliot listened in silence, anger toward the conspirators flaring anew. They hadn't just betrayed the company, they had preyed on good people's desperation, twisting loyalty into complicity. He saw now that Sarah wasn't a villain, she was collateral damage, someone with too much heart and too few options. "It's not too late to make it right," Elliot said quietly, "but it will take courage." Sarah hesitated, fear warring with hope across her face. In that moment, Elliot recognized something painfully familiar. The same look he had seen years ago when his grandmother had faced down greedy investors who wanted to franchise Sweet Crumbs beyond recognition. The same stubborn courage that had built this company from nothing. "I'll help," Sarah said finally, voice trembling but firm. "Just tell me what to do." Elliot nodded, a small swell of hope lifting the weight on his chest. He wasn't fighting alone anymore. The rot inside Sweet Crumbs ran deep, but so did the spirit that had once made it thrive. And now, for the first time in a long time, Elliot believed that spirit could be rekindled. Not just with lawsuits and firings, but with people like Sarah who still believed in what Sweet Crumbs was meant to be. The real rescue had begun. Armed with Sarah's quiet alliance and the mountain of evidence he had gathered, Elliot knew it was time to set the trap. Taking a break in the dimly lit break room, pretending to scroll his phone like any tired worker, he carefully coordinated with Diana Chin through encrypted messages. The plan was simple but risky. Create an irresistible bait, a fake, new premium recipe, and watch the conspirators steal it. Elliot's executive chef, working remotely under Diana's direction, prepared a detailed formula for a product called Golden Hearth Blend. On paper, it looked like a revolutionary upgrade to Sweet Crumb's classic recipes. Richer, more decadent. The kind of innovation a rival company couldn't resist rushing to market. But in practice, the recipe was deliberately flawed. If used at scale, it would collapse into a dense, flavorless mess. The fake recipe was uploaded into Sweet Crumb's highest security server, accessible only to the executive leadership, a server Derek Vaughn was known to have breached before. Within 24 hours, Diana confirmed the bait had been taken. Derek had downloaded the file under the guise of executive recipe evaluation, covering his tracks, poorly enough to leave a trail straight to Maple Grove's email servers. Elliot played it cool at work, scrubbing floors and stacking trays, while inwardly he counted the hours. Meanwhile, Sarah provided valuable intel. Travis and Will were buzzing with excitement in hushed conversations, too confident to notice the dishwasher's careful listening. They bragged about how the new blend was being rushed into Maple Grove's kitchens, faster than corporate approvals normally allowed. The arrogance and greed that had doomed them from the start now made them sloppy. Elliot made a mental note of every conversation, every slip of the tongue. The bakery itself continued to crumble in small ways, a customer angrily returning a dry lemon scone, another grimacing after a sip of watery coffee. Elliot hated seeing it, but he knew the real healing couldn't begin until the infection was cut out entirely. This wasn't just about catching criminals. It was about sending a message that Sweet Crumbs would not abandon the values it was built on. As he wiped down tables after closing time, Elliot allowed himself a rare, grim smile. The trap was in place. The bait had been swallowed whole. And soon, when Maple Grove publicly unveiled their new premium blend, the taste of betrayal would be impossible to mask. Elliot tightened the strings of his worn apron and glanced around the hollowed-out bakery. They thought they had broken Sweet Crumbs. Tomorrow, they would find out how wrong they were. The morning of the confrontation dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky Elliot's grandmother used to call baking weather, when the world seemed to hold its breath, waiting. Elliot arrived early at the Sweet Crumbs location, the familiar ache in his shoulders now joined by a sharper edge of anticipation. Today was the day. Dressed in his battered work clothes, he moved through the kitchen like any other shift, mopping, prepping pans, but his mind was razor-focused. Diana Chin had coordinated the final pieces. Security teams discreetly stationed nearby, legal counsel on standby, and media partners ready to capture the fallout if needed. Just before the store opened, a flurry of activity erupted as Derek Vaughn strode through the front door, trailed by a few sharp-suited executives that Elliot recognized from Maple Grove Bakery. Their presence, under the guise of a surprise inspection, confirmed it. Derek was about to cement the final betrayal, handing Sweet Crumbs over on a silver platter. Elliot stripped off his apron, straightened his posture, and stepped into the center of the kitchen. Conversations faltered, staff froze mid-motion. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized what was about to happen. Elliot's voice, when it rang out, carried the weight of years, steady, cold, undeniable. "Good morning, Mr. Vaughn," he said. "Or should I say, traitor?" The room fell deathly silent. Derek spun around, confusion flashing into horror. "You," he stammered, "you're just—" "I'm Elliot Marsh," he cut him off, his voice slicing through the tension like a blade. "Owner of Sweet Crumbs. And I've been here the whole time." Derek's mouth opened and closed like a drowning man grasping for air. Elliot lifted a small recorder from his pocket. "I have hours of conversations between you, Travis, and Will documenting fraud, theft, and sabotage. I have the fake recipe you stole. I have Maple Grove's plans delivered straight from your laptop." The Maple Grove executives paled, stepping back instinctively. Before Derek could recover, two plainclothes security officers stepped forward, flanking him. Across the room, Travis bolted toward the back door, but Sarah, brave, trembling Sarah, moved faster, blocking his path. "Going somewhere?" she asked, voice shaking, but firm. Elliot watched with grim satisfaction as police officers entered, reading Derek, Travis, and Will their rights. Customers in the dining room peered around corners, phones raised. Sweet Crumb's betrayal, once buried in whispers, now unfolded in full public view. As Derek was led away in handcuffs, Elliot's gaze swept across the stunned faces of his employees. "Sweet Crumbs isn't just a bakery," he said quietly. "It's a promise. And today, we keep it." The room, the very heart of his grandmother's dream, began to breathe again. In the days following the takedown, Sweet Crumbs buzzed with a strange, almost electric energy, the heavy fog of betrayal lifting at last. Elliot moved through the bakery in plain clothes now, no disguise, no pretense, shaking hands with employees who looked at him with a mix of awe and newfound hope. But he knew the real healing had only just begun. One afternoon he called a full staff meeting in the bakery's front dining room, the same space where the company's heart had nearly been broken. With Sarah standing nervously off to one side, Elliot addressed the gathered team. He didn't speak of stock prices or corporate restructures. Instead, he spoke of roots, of how Sweet Crumbs had been founded on trust, hard work, and community. He spoke of his grandmother, Ruth Marsh, kneading dough before sunrise, giving extra rolls to hungry families, treating every customer like a neighbor. "We lost sight of that," Elliot admitted, his voice steady but full of emotion, "and we nearly lost everything because of it." Then he made his announcements, changes not dictated by PR advisors, but by the lessons he had lived over the past brutal weeks. First, a profit-sharing program. Every employee, from dishwasher to district manager, would now share in Sweet Crumb's success. Second, the launch of an employee assistance fund, designed to help workers through medical emergencies or financial hardships, so no one would ever have to choose between loyalty and survival again. Third, a new From the Hearth program, requiring every executive, including Elliot himself, to spend 1 week each quarter working in-store, shoulder to shoulder with the staff. And as for second chances, Elliot continued, turning to Sarah, who looked like she might bolt for the door, they're real here. He offered her a new role, Director of Community Relations, tasked with making sure Sweet Crumbs stayed connected to the neighborhoods it served. Tears filled Sarah's eyes as she accepted, earning a wave of applause from her coworkers. Elliot finished by unveiling the first of many new initiatives, the relaunch of Grandma Ruth's legacy roll, a recipe slightly modernized, but rooted in the same love and craftsmanship that had built Sweet Crumbs from a dusty kitchen to a national name. That evening, as the first new batch of rolls came out of the oven, rich, fragrant, golden with promise, customers lined up down the block, drawn back not by marketing gimmicks, but by something far rarer, authenticity. Elliot stood by the door, greeting every patron with a handshake and a smile, feeling the weight on his shoulders finally lift. Sweet Crumbs wasn't just surviving, it was coming home. A month later, Elliot Marsh stood before the tiny brick building where it had all begun, the original Sweet Crumbs bakery, now lovingly restored as a company museum. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar sense of cinnamon and warm bread that seemed to seep from the very walls. Inside, beneath the hand-carved sign that simply read, "Welcome Home," hung a portrait of Ruth Marsh, apron dusted with flour, her eyes twinkling with quiet defiance and endless kindness. Elliot approached the old wooden counter, the same one his grandmother had once leaned across to hand out pies and encouragement in equal measure. From a small paper bag, he pulled out one perfect cinnamon roll, the new legacy roll, and placed it gently on a plate beneath her photo. "We kept the promise, Grandma," he whispered, the words catching in his throat. Outside, a line of customers wrapped around the block, waiting not just for pastries, but for a piece of something real, something that couldn't be bought or faked. Sweet Crumbs had survived betrayal, greed, and near ruin, not by chasing trends or hollow profits, but by returning to its roots, family, honesty, and heart. As Elliot stepped back into the sunshine, the company's new slogan gleamed proudly across the storefront. Sweet Crumbs, where every recipe tells a story. Smiling to himself, Elliot knew the fight to protect his grandmother's dream had changed him forever. The world might move faster now, demand flashier things, but there would always be a hunger for something genuine. And Sweet Crumbs, reborn from its own ashes, was ready to meet it. One roll, one smile, and one act of kindness at a time. The story of Elliot Marsh and Sweet Crumbs teaches a timeless lesson. True success isn't built on profits, shortcuts, or clever marketing. It's built on values that withstand betrayal, hardship, and changing times. Elliot's journey back to the heart of his family's bakery reminds us that when leadership becomes disconnected from the people it serves, even the strongest legacies can begin to crumble. But it also shows that redemption is possible, not just by rooting out corruption, but by restoring trust, investing in people, and honoring the spirit that created something special in the first place. In a world that often prizes speed and efficiency over authenticity, Elliot's fight to protect his grandmother's vision reminds us that integrity, loyalty, and community matter most. Success without heart is hollow. A brand without soul is forgettable. It's not the recipes or the profits that define a business, it's the human spirit behind it. And when leaders are willing to roll up their sleeves, humble themselves, and rebuild from the ground up, they don't just save companies, they rekindle something far greater, hope. True leadership is about protecting not just what you build, but why you built it in the first place.